Hi everybody, it's Darlene McLennan here, the Manager of the Australian Disability Clearinghouse in Education and Training, and also the NDCO for North and Northwest of Tasmania. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge that I am on Aboriginal land, and I'd like to pay my respects and acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land, the Palawa people. I want to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and I would also like to acknowledge the Tasmanian Aboriginal community for their continually maintaining their identity, culture and Aboriginal rights. So thank you everybody for joining us. This is a first for us to actually run a panel discussion like this, so it's a bit scary and daunting. I was trying to sleep last night going, please don't worry about it, brain, but so I'm glad it's here because it'll soon be over. But also the fact that it's a great topic. It's been probably one of the things that have been really requested from the sector around having some discussion around this topic, so it's fantastic. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we start. If you want to activate your closed captions, you click on the CC button, which is on the toolbar, which is either located at the bottom of your screen or at the side or at the top, depending on how you've got your Zoom set up. You can increase the lines appearing in the caption box. You just need to click on the small arrow on the right-hand side to do that. If you're having any technical difficulties, you can email us at admin@adcet.edu.au. Today we're going to do introduction of our panel members. They will provide a little bit of an overview of their role, and Karen will give us an overview of her project. And then I've got some set questions and a case study, and then we'll open up the floor to questions. We won't be able to ask people's individual questions by raising hands because we can't guarantee that your sound or so forth will work, but I'll ask them. I have David Swain, who is the NDCO for Queensland, managing the questions, and he will just shoot me questions as we go. The reality is we're not going to get to all the questions because we've already probably had 15 questions prior to this. So as I said, it's a really exciting topic that people are wanting to engage. Just another thing to remember when you do ask questions, if you can do that in the chat box, and in the chat box you can actually choose to either ask panellists or panellists and attendees, and I encourage you to do it to the panelists and attendees so everybody can see your questions. This way we can have a really interactive session where some people may be able to answer your questions who are joining us today, or it may just start some networking opportunities for you to catch up with each other, or to have some discussions offline today. All right, that's all of the housekeeping over and done with. So now I'd like to welcome our panel members. So today we have Michelle Campbell, who is a Senior Manager for Student Equity and Support of University of Newcastle. Welcome, Michelle. We also have Michelle Anderson, the Manager of Access and Inclusion Student Engagement Unit at the University of South Australia. We have Karen Lester-Smith, the Director of an NDIS project with the Gould, and Meredith Jackson, the Lead Vocational Teacher from Disability Services in TAFE Queensland. So we're well represented from the states, across the states and territories, which is great. So thank you all for joining us. A special thank you to Meredith, who's sick today. So she's dragged herself off her sick bed to join us. So what we're going to do is just go through each of the panel members. Michelle Campbell's has suggested I call her Shell so that I don't get confused. At one point we actually had another Michelle lined up to be a part of it, and that was going to be really complicated. So I'm glad we haven't. But we might start with you, Shell Campbell, and if you could just talk a little bit about your role.
Yeah. So as the Senior Manager of Student Equity and Support, I've got a wide portfolio of staff, including the staff from the accessibility team who support students with disability. My teams also look at the intake for counselling, at student loans and welfare, and I have an equity and diversity coordinator and someone who looks after threatening, concerning and worrying behaviours. In terms of accessibility and our interface with NDIS, my experience here is having supported students through planning meetings and then follow-up meetings with local area coordinators as required.
Great, thank you. Michelle, it's hard to call you Shell, I'm going to have to practice. Okay, I might hand over to the other Michelle. So Michelle Anderson.
Thanks, Darlene. Yes, so I'm the Manager of Access and Inclusion at UniSA in South Australia. So that means that I manage the Access and Inclusion team, people who work directly with students to develop access plans and advise around their accessibility needs and supports. I also have responsibility for developing our LGBTQIA+ initiatives as well. I have a background in disability and I also worked for the NDIS for 3 years here in South Australia as an assistant director of service delivery. So I have that background knowledge as well as the interface with now the higher education here at the university. We have not had a lot of students disclose their plans to us, but we do know that they exist and we have had some people that we've referred on to the scheme.
Brilliant, thank you. Now, to you, Meredith.
Hi everyone, thanks Darlene. Meredith Jackson, I coordinate the disability support for TAFE Skills Tech, which is our large trade TAFE. I work across 4 campuses and I work like on the front line with the student, establishing their plans. I organise the support for them. I'm an educator. I do a lot of education with our teachers on supporting our students. I'm also the TAFE Queensland Attend rep. A large part of my role is in the educational sort of side of it and working very closely with the students in identifying, what the expectations are of the courses that they're going into and ensuring that the reasonable adjustments are in place for them. We've got a team of about 10 that I manage that go out in our classrooms and provide that support. Thanks everyone.
Brilliant, thank you. And finally over to you, Karen, if you can explain your role would be great and what project you're working on.
Great. So we've been working across the TAFE network in Victoria for about a year now, looking at the TAFE response to the NDIS in particular. So we're based at the Gould in Geelong, but we're working across the TAFE network in Victoria, of which there are 16 TAFEs in Victoria with multiple campuses. My background is as an OT and have worked in the social insurance sector for the last 12 years. The basic overview of our project is to look at collaboration and increasing opportunities for industry engagement for the TAFE network, and also to look at students with a disability and increasing inclusive and accessible education for students with disability, and also looking at TAFE as an inclusive workplace.
Brilliant, sounds like a fascinating project.
Yeah.
Great, excellent. All right, thank you for that. So we kind of have been kind of chatting by email, the group of us, about some of the questions that we might ask. So we've kind of, as I said earlier, there's probably thousands of things we can kind of ask. But I suppose the first one we're wanting to focus on, have you noticed any changes or any benefits, negative or positive, for students with disability in your universities or TAFE that with the introduction of the insurance scheme? So I don't know if Shell, are you maybe answer that one?
I would think that we have a number of students with high support needs and high care needs who have been more readily able to attend university because of the support they've been given through the scheme. For example, previously a student who would require personal care on campus might have had to have been met by a parent, taken off campus, only done one subject at a time, whereas now with someone to attend to personal care needs and to be able to come onto campus, these students can be carrying out a part-time or in some cases even a full-time load thanks to the supports that are in place.
Brilliant. Anybody else want to answer to that question at all?
Hi, it's Meredith here from TAFE. Just as Shell said, we've had an increase of external support workers that are, are coming onto the campus and providing that additional support to the students outside of, the scope of our role as educators, and that's been a really positive, sight to see. We've just found as the educational provider, we've had more call to provide information around the scope of and role of the external worker, and develop some guidelines around that, just to ensure that they understand what their role and responsibilities is, what workplace health and safety is, and what being a participant in a TAFE environment is. One of the other areas that I've noticed myself is an increase in people that are actually case managing or advocating for the students, calling up and making contact with me about the supports available from the educational perspective at TAFE for the student, which has been positive. But I've also noticed that some of the organisations that they come from are not familiar to me. So there's, I think, been an increase in service providers working with the students in regards to putting educational plans together and advocating and making these calls on behalf. And I've also experienced quite a gap in understanding. So this is probably more of a negative that I've come across. The people that are ringing up and advocating don't have much grounding in what a vocational educational course is all about and what the inherent requirements are. And that to me has been a concern, but we're in a fortunate place where we do pre-entry enrolment before they enrol, so we are capturing them and navigating students at times into courses more appropriate.
Yeah, it's great. And further to that, Meredith, is the issue around the role of the staff employed by the TAFE and then staff employed through the persons in NDIS package. You said that you're often having to teach, inform the NDIS staff, funded staff, about their role, but also about, is there been need to clarify, what the role of your educational staff is and what your role as a personal support person to that to the individual has been?
Yes, yeah, that's quite common still to get that clarification, and it can be very grey. And I've had situations where the support worker and the students has been in class with a support worker on one side, and then an external support person on the other side. So we've just had to get some clear grounds there on what the role is, as well in situations where we've got a student coming in with an external support worker funded through NDIS. We've had to be very transparent and clear with the communication with our educators to make sure that they understand what the role is there. And I have had some good feedback, and then I've had some questions around, what is the role of those people coming in, and I've had feedback where at times the external support people have been seen to be providing educational assistance. So there's been a little bit of a challenge there, but it's just continued education with our teachers as well, so that they're managing it respectfully in their classrooms.
Yeah. So to give us some ideas on what those roles, the NDIS funded roles, could undertake, have you got some, some examples that you could give people?
It could be as far as helping the student to get transport. So helping the student navigate transport, get into the classroom, helping the student settle into the class environment. So some personal sort of socialisation skills, monitoring how the students' well-being is, being available there to support them if they need to with, personal needs, dietary needs as well. And then also, I guess, communicating anything appropriate to our staff as well whilst they're on campus.
Yeah. Thank you. Anybody want to add to that at all of a panel? All good. All right, so it leads us into the next question around the grey area, and I think this is often one of the grey areas around that we kind of come up with the intersectionality between the NDIS and the further education. So I think like one of the grey areas may be perceived as, that communication. So often, or especially as a further education provider, there is an expectation that a student comes ready to learn and able to participate fully, and then often that, especially somebody on the autism spectrum, for example, may really struggle to understand the hidden agendas or to communicate effectively with lecturers or teachers and so forth. Is there experience you've had in those grey areas? So Michelle Anderson, you've kind of popped up there. Are you?
Yeah, yes. So there is some confusion we found with families around what they can use their funds for and what they can't, for those who are on the spectrum and who have a plan. And so we do provide some level of participation assistance support from the university, but that's quite limited in what we can fund. So we do talk to the parents around how they might like to use some of their support funding to support or to the student themselves. But we find that the students on the spectrum still have significant parental and family involvement, as they should, in terms of supporting them. And that's been a struggle for some levels of the university, accepting that this person doesn't come ready to just pop into an adult learning environment with all the skills, all the prerequisite skills that they're expecting. So yes, that's a big grey area for us, I think.
Yeah, we'll probably jump too much into that. That's kind of the case study that we're looking at
Sorry.
today with this. No, it's my fault, because we think, that's probably some of the grey areas. Is there any other grey areas people are thinking that they could identify at this stage?
I noticed that Meredith made mention of assistance with transport. I just want to note that as soon as the student crosses the threshold into the university grounds, transport within the grounds of the university is the responsibility of the university.
Mm-hmm.
So in our case, we've just purchased a new van. It can carry 2 wheelchairs and 6 passengers, and it is staffed by students who are our mobility bus drivers. And we've now got a new campus in the city, so sometimes we're transporting even between campuses, because travel training the student to catch the shuttle bus like everyone else is not always possible. So I just need to note that, yes, it's the student's responsibility to get here, but after that, it's our responsibility. And I think, Darlene, that might lead us into potentially a conversation later around transport while on placement as well, which is going to prove difficult for a number of us.
Yeah. No. Any other grey areas as well? Are we?
Probably just for us, it's where it crosses the line into, and this was touched on before, where a support worker crosses the line into academic support and assignment writing, assisting with breaking down an assessment task, proofreading assignments, things like that. That gets that's quite a murky area as well. That and often we get asked for tutor support for assisting with those things that we can't necessarily provide, but could be provided in their NDIS plan in terms of. Yeah,
and that's that challenge too, is, for people to succeed in their study, it comes back to that sense of without that, and the reality is universities can't support, the 30,000 or the 40,000 student with individual unpacking your assignment. They might have bulk sessions or individual, sessions that students can book into for 15 minutes for half an hour, but, a student on the spectrum, for example, might need more support than that. And I think, understanding that you could name that up as tutorial support, not tutorials, mentoring support, maybe another way that people need to frame that. So it's not actually academic support, but it's actually mentoring the students, which does come under the insurance scheme. So it's not necessarily academic support, because the impact of somebody on the autism spectrum with their executive functioning, the disability impacts on their executive functioning skills, then that's where you kind of can fight with the insurance scheme. But it's still a very grey area. That's good. Is there any areas or services of support that you feel that neither are kind of taking on? Is there any gaps in those areas? Has anybody come across thinking, well, who is, or no one's doing it? Or,
no, not here.
No, that's fine.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to say, I think one of the big problems that we continue to see, remembering that the Hunter region was a trial site back in 2014, is the increase of young people who aren't ready for university. This is not the right, and not say young people sometimes, this is not the right place and right time, but the increase in those people being questioned and necessarily referred potentially by NDIS staff saying the university provides really good support. Maybe you should go to the university and they'll be able to help you. So it's that expectation building that might have happened with a planner, and then the student lands here, and that creates an awful lot of additional work for us to communicate just what we can provide and what is reasonable.
It's quite frustrating, isn't it? Yep.
I would echo that from a Victorian TAFE perspective as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, certainly TAFE as well.
So yeah, so more probably the outcome for that is some more skilled, some more development around the planners and LACs would be good. Just while we're having this break, we do have a poll that we're just going to ask people a question. So what we'll do in that time is we won't talk. We will put the poll up on the screen for people to provide. Are you right to do the poll, Jane? Kind of, hopefully she's not dealing with too many back-end problems here.
Yes, I am. If you can read out the question.
Yep, that's fine. I'll read out the question and then we won't talk for a little while. So the caption, if people who are needing the captioning, we won't talk either. So until we complete. All right, you right? Do you feel you are well informed about what NDIA should fund and what the further education sector should fund to support a student to succeed in further education? So it's a yes or no answer. So if people could take the time to do that, and we'll just wait for 1 minute. Okay, hopefully you've all had a chance to vote. Are you able to share the results, Jane? Have you learned that part yet?
Yeah, just wait on a second, just a few more still coming in.
Okay, just while we're waiting for that, this grey area around transport on campus, yeah, I think it's really clear around if you were going to you were studying land care, for example, at the university, and they were heading off on a field trip, and you're in a wheelchair, yes, they would need to provide accessible transport to that for you. The university would have to be responsible. But as far as, yeah, so Michelle, have you had clear, Michelle,
Yes.
have you had clear guidance around, on campus around, because I suppose the question is about orientation, mobility.
Yeah.
So for people who are blind or vision impaired, where does orientation and mobility end and start for NDIS and the university versus the physical needs of, a bus to get you around campus or a moped to get you around campus? So
the way I look at it is you just compare it to whether another student requires it or not. So if you're doing a course and part of that course requires you to attend a field trip somewhere, then it's part of your responsibility as a student to do that independently. Then you could, in theory, use your NDIS plan funding for that, because it's not being provided by the university as a standard. Does that make sense? Whereas if the university is providing a bus or some sort of transport to the field trip, then it's the university's responsibility to provide whatever accessible transport that person might require. Other people do not require mobility or orientation. That is purely related to a person's eyesight and disability condition for which they're eligible for the scheme. Then that is, in my mind, very clearly an NDIS responsibility, because no other students are getting mobility and orientation.
And it's not actually based in class. Sorry, Michelle?
I said Michelle's just taught me something then, because from my experience, orientation and mobility training, I would still contact guide dogs and they would come out and they would spend time prior to the semester and during the semester, and even in the second semester when classes change, would come back and do some further orientation to new classrooms, new spaces, etc.
And they would fund. You would fund that?
No,
No.
guide dogs
Yep.
would just say thank you, and they. At the moment, we haven't had an instance where we've been asked for payment of any kind by either the participant or us. It is just a service that they provide.
Yeah.
So previously they did, because they were bulk funded. So
That's
previously,
right, yeah.
and so now that they're not bulk funded and under the insurance scheme, they're individually funded. There has been some questions raised, and yeah, I think we certainly asked NDIS for NDIA to clarify around this issue, and they've come back saying no, they do see that NDIA actually are responsible to fund.
Oh, good.
Fund that.
So they should, yes.
And that it sits under the principles. So Jane, there are principles. There's two kind of important pages that you can actually access. There's the COAG agreement, which provides the principles of agreement between the further education sector and all mainstream services and the insurance scheme. And then there's also some operational guidelines, which we discovered today again. So we'll put that in the chat box for people to access. So I'll give you a really, kind of unpack some of these grey areas. Not all of them, but it gives you a little bit of the principles behind some of the thought of who's responsible as a mainstream service. Yep. Sorry, Michelle.
The NDIA always go when they're decision making. They always go back to that series of questions. So if it answers yes, so if a support answers yes to all those questions, then it's clearly within the NDIS plan to fund.
Yep. Okay. So just another question is around study goals. So often as practitioners, you may come across students with disability and you may need to provide advice on how they can, ensure their plan actually meets their need. So what study goals do you see working well in students' plans if you've actually worked with any individual students or seen anybody's plans? So is there any generalist principles? Or Shell, have you come across anything in this?
Thanks for putting me on the spot,
Sorry.
darling. That's okay. Look, I think there's been a great variation in students who have had additional, let's call it mentoring support included in their plan, and those who haven't. The variation, I think, exists in terms of those who are self-managing as opposed to those who have a coordinator of supports, which from a meeting I was at with a participant last week, they're being minimised. So plans are going to be either agency managed or self-managed. If you're self-managed, there's a lot more flexibility in how you use some of those funds. And I'm talking about ethically using them. I'm not talking about doing anything to undermine what they're there for. But there is some license, I suppose, in looking at what is in each of those categories and how do I best use that funding to support my need, whether that be my educational goal or whether that be capacity building in some other form. So it depends what that initial conversation has been like, how good the plan is, and then how creative the student is about how to use what's in that plan, but also how to effectively use the on-campus services that exist for everyone regardless.
Yeah. Anybody want to add anything to that? You're all good?
Yeah, at TAFE. Oh,
yep.
Sorry.
Go for it.
Yeah. At TAFE, I mean, we work under our training standards, RTO standards, which do require us to undertake entry enrolment and interviews with our students. So, at that first point of contact, we're all about informing the students to make the right choice, identifying whether the entry level is appropriate, in establishing a good entry level. In TAFE Queensland, we have career counsellors that the students can access to assist them to formulate a plan. And if they are students that are working with our team and they have an accessibility plan, we establish what their short and longer term goals are in regards to their education. And part of our team's role is also just to be tracking and making sure that they're working through okay and they're achieving their goals. And like any student, you know, all of our students are provided with that opportunity to get that feedback and make, you know, adjustments to their plans in education as necessary.
Brilliant. So I might take this opportunity to do a plug. Hopefully a lot of you know that on ADCET we actually have a resource called, or it's ultimately called, Getting the Right Support at the Right Time from the Right People. So it's an NDIS pre-planning toolkit for people with disabilities entering into further education. So that was an NDCO developed resource, and it's broken into 8 booklets for the different disability types, the main disability types, and it kind of unpacks kind of what your expectations should be around the university or TAFE providing you, and what the expectations around NDIS. So we'll put that in the chat pod. So if you haven't heard of it, take a look at it. So we might move on to the case study now, and we have talked a little bit about autism, and it is a student on the autism spectrum. So we probably have answered some of these questions, but maybe something else might fall out of this. So Jack is a 20-year-old student on the autism spectrum and is an NDIS participant. He's received an offer to study at a university next year. He will live on campus. His mother is concerned that Jack doesn't manage his finances very well or cook for himself. The impact of his disability means Jack has poor organisational skills, and if focused on a task, can go a day or so without eating or drinking. Jack finds it hard to understand the unwritten rules and nuances of social communication. He struggles to start and finish conversations and can come across abrupt and rude to others. He has a keen interest in science, microbiology and biological chemistry, and plans to start a science degree doing 3 subjects a semester. Despite his passion and knowledge of the subject, it is identified in his planning meeting at university, before starting university, is that Jack's going to struggle with long lab classes. He'll find it difficult to align his time with, may find it difficult to align time with questions in exams. He can become overwhelmed by what to study. He will struggle being in an exam room with others, as noise and activity would distract him, and also he has hypersensitivity to people, lights and noise. Jack also will find it difficult to work in small groups. He won't approach academic staff if he has issues, and he doesn't manage his time well. He becomes overwhelmed with new information, and he struggles to make friends, as he can't initiate conversation, and he feels people judge him harshly. So just over to the university staff for the moment, what kind of things would you put in as a university to support Jack to succeed in his study? So Shell or Michelle, any? Yep.
Luckily, we have a specialist peer mentor program. So we've trained students who are in their 2nd, 3rd or 4th year of an OT teaching psychology degree to be peer mentors for students with autism and related conditions. Those students are paid by us. We have regular meetings with them for supervision purposes, and they also run a social group. So, you know, the case study talks about the academic side for Jack, as well as Jack struggles to make friends. The mentor, who can be available to talk to Jack for up to an hour each week, and also do some social stuff with him, can support that. Anyone that's living on campus and struggling to cook, to clean, etc., I would say NDIS can be providing support through funding someone to come on campus and help with some capacity building for Jack, whether that be daily. We know we have students who have someone come to them each day, make sure they get up, make sure they take their medication, and make sure they get ready in a timely manner to come to campus. That depends very much on the evidence that person has gathered to say that support's required. But there are cases that I know of definitely where those things have helped and have made an awful lot of difference to the students' attendance and their ability to function within the new learning environment.
Yeah. Michelle, anything for you to
add? Yeah, so similarly to Michelle, we have called a student transition and retention star mentor program, and again that's paid students who we assign to new students, on particularly those on the spectrum, and they provide support for orientation around campus, for social connections, for all of that kind of beginning process. We would also talk to that person about considering a reduced study load. We have an opportunity to offer them an alternative exam venue and alternative exam arrangements around his anxiety in those situations. We started putting in participation assistance, particularly for students on the spectrum, who go beyond what the STAR person does. This is a participation assistant is focused more on the academic planning, what it means to map out what all the assignments and things that you have for the term or the semester, looking at setting target dates of when things need to be done by, all that executive functioning stuff that they struggle with. And I agree with Michelle in terms of anything related to activities of daily living would supposed to be assisted with funding from the NDIS. We don't have on-campus accommodation, but yeah.
No. So with the participation, I mean, I suppose for me, those participation supports, I mean, that's where once again, that grey area where, you know, through your plan, you actually could get mentoring support to help you unpack, to help you communicate with your lecturers and so forth. But the university is also looking at supporting with that, or is it more in class or?
No, we try not to do in-class support. Our academics, there's been a number of academics who are struggling with the behaviours that some students are exhibiting in class. We offer lots of training and support to them, but obviously they don't tend to take that up. Certainly not before. They might later, but certainly not before. And and we've had a couple of situations where a student has been so-called banned from a classroom because the lecturer refused to let them back in without some sort of, without, you know, side-by-side support. So we've had to negotiate through that.
But you still wouldn't see that as NDIS, because I suppose that sense of often behavioural support, because like especially in the TAFE environment, if someone can't manage their behaviour and whatever, is often it is up to the NDIS.
So we then we would support them accessing that external to the university, but and then we kind of do a phased back in approach in terms of support. But we try to give them the participation and mentoring support outside of the classroom wherever possible. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Well, a year later, Jack hasn't done as well as he'd hoped. He got a distinction in one of the units with the area of interest, but he failed 2 other units that were more generalist. He's decided he wants to study ICT now and is looking at attending his local TAFE. So now, Meredith, Jack's coming your way. What supports and adjustments will you be offering Jack, and what suggestions can you make to help him manage his NDIS plan?
Okay, first thing I would do with Jack is meet with him, arrange to meet with him, and sit down and have a conversation and get some more information regarding his career interests. I mean, I'll be digging down to find out why is it that, you know, he's wanting to pursue a pathway in ICT. We don't know whether that was the area that he succeeded in at university. You know, often we'll get students come in that want to go down a particular pathway because they've got a friend or a relative or someone's encouraged it. So I'd have that conversation with him. I would be referring him to go and meet with our careers counsellor, who will, you know, do some further work in that area just to really gauge, you know, what it is that, you know, he wants to do and is it ICT. And also at that time, I would look into where his core skills are. So, you know, having a look at what was it that impacted on his success in the university. You know, possibly he's got some gaps in his skills with his reading, his writing, his numeracy, his learning as well, that, you know, are impacting on his learning. So not just, you know, the impact of disability. Once, you know, we determine what it is that Jack wants to do, and if it is this ICT pathway, I then look at how the course is actually delivered. So, you know, what's our timeframes, what modes of delivery, where, you know, is he on campus, is he external? I look at, I get verification of disability, and I also ask for any previous educational plans that he's had. It could have been through school, or if he's got something from university, that enables me to determine and have conversation with him around what worked well for him. So, you know, it's all about building their awareness and confidence as well to advocate for themselves and talk about what, you know, what is it that they feel needs to be put in place to support them. Then would formulate a learning plan, and, you know, using similar educational adjustments Michelle mentioned before around, you know, the planning, time management, you know, whether we need to put supports in place, you know, regularly with having some disability support tutoring, or, you know, whether it's just around that engagement and planning with the teacher. So that's pretty well how we would handle it. Oh, and also again, determining whether they've got the NDIS plan in place, and what supports there that he feels outside of our educational role that would be enablers for him.
Yes, excellent. Karen, anything you wanted to add to that one, or the scope of your project?
Oh, just in relation to when we were researching one of our projects, the common areas in TAFEs, you know, whether that be canteens or you know, courtyards, etc., that the staff in those areas, whether that's in the bookshop or those other areas around the canteen, etc., that they all have sufficient training and awareness of interactions with students with disability. That's made a huge difference for some TAFEs in Victoria.
Oh, brilliant. Excellent. Well, thank you for that. I'll let you know how Jack goes in his journey to education and his journey with NDIS. We're just now going over to the questions. Before we do that, we might put up the second the second poll, Jane, if you're right to do that.
Yep, I'll just, with the first one, it was 66% said no and 34% said yes.
Very good. Okay.
So that's sharing it, so you should see it.
So do you feel you're well informed? 66% said no and 34% said yes.
Okay.
So, okay, now we'll get the next one up. And while Jane's doing that, there is a question here around if people are registered with NDIS as a provider. So we might ask that after we ask this question. Do you think planners and LACs are well aware of the support students could have in their plans to support them to succeed in further education? So once again, it's a yes or no answer. So do you think planners and LACs are well aware of the support students could have in their plans to support them to succeed in further education? I'll just give you a... so I've been stopping talking because I was worried that the captioning doesn't work, but it appears to keep working, so that's good. So yeah, so are people registered with NDI as a provider? Is the university or TAFE a registered provider with NDIA? Michelle Anderson, are you?
Not yet, but I know that it is in consideration.
Yeah. And Michelle?
Not something we've considered, no.
Yep. Meredith?
No, not TAFE Queensland aren't, or they're not even considering either.
Yeah.
Sorry, Darlene, I'll just qualify that.
Yep.
The section of the university that's considering it would be our health sciences division in terms of delivering services in a clinical setting on a fee-for-service basis.
Very good, yeah, and I think ours is as well. So
and there's a couple of TAFEs in Victoria, that one in particular that has registered as a provider and actually provides personal support as a provider.
Yep. And so I'm sure TAS TAFE won't mind me talking about this. So TAS TAFE started off because we've had the NDIS here in Tasmania for about 6 years, I think now. They started off as a registered provider to do just that, personal care and so forth, because previously the state government did fund some support workers on campus within TAFE, especially for the work cert ones that they were doing for people with significant disabilities. So they registered, but then they found that difficulty of permanency. So if staff were working consistently over the time, they would become a permanent state employee, but they may not necessarily have the students the next year that will actually be receiving the funding in their plan. So they now actually outsource it to an NGO to actually put the support into the class. So they've got over that situation. So yeah, okay, we'll keep going. There's lots of questions. So thank you everybody for, we're not going to get to them all, but I'll ask a few now. Somebody's actually had some feedback from deaf students as well as Auslan interpreter providers that the NDIS does not allow students to use interpreter funds on campus, even if it's for social events such as students' clubs. Has anybody else had that experience? So, about the social versus class support? No?
No.
No. So
I have paid for an Auslan interpreter to attend a social event because they're so few and far between. To me, that little bit of additional assistance is good in terms of reputation for the university.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it should be in the individual's plan anyway. They should have that flexibility to be able to use their dollars to prioritise their Auslan. But I mean, it would also be good practice for you as an institute, an organisation, if you are, if you've got an event, you would hope that you'd be encouraging them to actually have Auslan interpreting if people have actually named it up as that's what their needs are. But I still think if, the individual's wanting to have a conversation in the cafe with his mates or her mates, that isn't the responsibility of the education provider. So, yeah. Okay. Can an NDIS cover content tuition or training in technology? So I think the training in technology, anybody want to answer that one in the round?
If a piece of technology has been purchased with NDIS funds, then any training associated with that should be paid for with the funds. That's pretty much the kind of basic way to work it out. So if they only require the AT or software in a specific educational setting, then you might say that that's the institution's responsibility. But if it's something they already have and use in multiple domains, then it goes to the NDIS plan.
Yep. Any other comments for that?
No, other than if it's a reasonable adjustment, it's obviously the university who are providing the training.
Okay. Now someone's asked, can NDIS refuse wheelchair support to a student as long as he or she is studying? I don't quite understand that question. Do you think that would be more personal care, or would that be assisting someone out of their car? Anybody can interpret that question?
Or is someone saying the terrain of the particular university and a new chair isn't being funded? A particular chair that they think they require, and that an OT has assessed them requiring, has had that knocked back by the agency, and it's gone to appeal. So I don't know what the question's asking, but it could be anything. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's contextual, really.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, I suppose there's still a lot more questions around that, the divide between academic support and personal support, and describe the role of university employed assistants for students alongside NDIS employed support workers. Is there anything else people want to add to what we've already said about that to make it a little bit more clearer, or do you think we've covered it off enough?
I'd like to know how Michelle's managing to fund these student transition staff to work so closely, because we would have so many students that would require that. It's just financially not appropriate.
Yeah. So it's only for those, it's not for every student. And we allocate between 6 and 10 hours only.
Okay.
That's how. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think I've seen a lot of examples of people successfully receiving mentoring support, you know, being able to fund mentors within their NDIS, have it in their NDIS plan, and that's to help them kind of communicate with lecturers, to help them unpack their study load, you know, because it is, yeah, I think it's really important that we keep that, you know, if that's going to set the student up to succeed and it's over and above of what universities and TAFEs can provide, then the NDIS plan, you would hope, would be flexible enough to be able to utilise that. But it's using the right words. I think we're talking about that prior to the forum today, was sometimes you have to know the right words to use, because if you went into your planning meeting and said, I need tutorial support, the LAC or planner will say, no, that's the university or TAFE's responsibility. But if you say you need actually mentoring support to actually help you navigate, to communicate effectively, to unpack, you know, to manage your time and unpack your assignments, then they would probably fund that. So it's helping students understand the wording that they use is going to kind of impact on their thing. So, okay, so just within the end of just kind of finishing up, what about the communication lines between further education and the LACs? Have anybody had some good experiences, or are people kind of seeing how we can better facilitate more communication between the NDIS funded providers and the further education sector?
I was approached by one of our LACs here in South Australia early in the year. They approached me and said, we'd love to come and meet you, find out what your points of contention are, what you offer, what we offer, what the interplay could be. So I thought that was really great. They were really good, really interested in understanding what we could offer as a university, and how that would then interact with a plan, perhaps.
Yep.
But only
And
one.
Darlene,
I'm sorry, which one first?
Go on, Michelle.
I was just going to say, only one provider's done that. None of the others have.
Okay.
Darlene, I think for those universities that have NDCOs working with them, there's a great opportunity for the NDCOs to start and open up those lines of communication with LACs. I know I've got relationships with a number of LACs, but they change over time, and it's really hard to keep tabs on who they are.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's for the NDCO program, I suppose that kind of looking at that strategically too, of how we can work with the NDIA to ensure that their staff, as a broader thing of their staff, are skilled and knowledged in this area. One of the things that I recently discovered, I think there was a data that was collected on outcomes for NDIS participants, and I think 33% felt that they couldn't study what they wanted to study or receive the support. So I'm probably talking out of school because I haven't got but the numbers were quite low in regards to people accessing further education. So I think there's a lot of work we still need to be done to ensure people with disabilities see that as a viable and a pathway into, and that can succeed.
I suppose the other thing we ask when we register a student for support is, do you have an NDIS plan? Because for some, they say, no, what's that? And then that opens up another opportunity for us to have a conversation. And there are quite a number where we've said, it seems that you're eligible, you need to check your eligibility, and here's how you can do that. So we ask that question specifically upon registration to either have that further conversation or look at whether what they've got, and we won't go line by line through a plan, but we'll talk to them about those things that they might consider next time they go for another pre-planning meeting.
Yeah, excellent. So Michelle Anderson, do you ask if they've got a plan?
We haven't been, but that's something that I'd like to integrate into our system. We just can't record it. We ask verbally, but we haven't got a place to record that at the moment. So
yeah,
it's just in a note.
Yep. And Meredith, what about for your TAFE?
Yeah, I have been starting, and I know some of my colleagues at the other campuses have as well, starting to ask that with the students. And I also get in that position where the student or the parent, if they're under 18, will actually say to me, "What is that? I don't know what it is." So then that is that opportunity to give them some information and refer them. But just on the LACs and on the networks, I know my colleagues across TAFE have asked about improving on how we actually have opportunities to meet and get to know who our regional LACs are and work closer with them. So I think that's a really great initiative.
Excellent. And Karen, is it something that your project's looking at all if TAFEs in Victoria are keeping knowledgeable around who has plans and who doesn't?
Yeah, we've been working with the NDIA and our LAC providers, there's only 3 in Victoria, to see whether TAFE can provide training to the LACs. So we're going through that channel as well through our project. But I've been actively talking to TAFEs about establishing the connection and relationship with their LAC and ECEI partners.
Excellent. All right, looking at the time, it's gone quickly and I'll be able to sleep tonight. So any final comments from people? You're all good? So we've got some fantastic questions we'll go through. If we haven't answered your question.
It's Jane here. We'll just pop the poll up.
I've got to get used to this. So the outcome of the poll is, do you think, so interesting, no. So 91% of people think that LACs and planners don't have, are being aware of what kind of supports to help students succeed in their studies. So that's very telling. So that's brilliant. So thank you everybody for participating in the polls. Thank you for putting in questions. I've noticed that there's been answers as well, so that's been fantastic. We've had over 50 questions asked, so that's a huge interaction, so which is fantastic. Thank you so much to the panel members. It's a huge ask. We've had lots of toing and froing, but I really appreciate your time. It's invaluable to kind of start these discussions. We will be sending out a survey. I think hopefully this is just one of many. I think there's probably lots of different topics we could do in panel discussions, and we could probably even do more in around the NDIS space as well. So thank you everybody for your time. Just a quick plug, our next webinar is on the 17th of October, which will be another panel discussion. Now that we've started, we're not going to stop, where we're actually inviting students who have learning disabilities to talk about their experience within further education with learning disabilities. So really looking forward to that one. But I thank you to the 4 panel members for letting me play in this space for the first time, because it's something that we haven't done. I always like challenging myself with new things each couple of years, so it's great. So thank you everybody online. Thank you to the ballkeeper. No, thank you to the Auslan, the captioner as well, and to Jane and David in the back end. It was fantastic to have you all join us, and we look forward to catching up next time. Thank you.
Thanks, Darlene.
Thanks, Darlene.
Thank you.